In 1992, a survey of 5,947 American adults was read as evidence that being taken runs in the blood. For 40 years, the argument has been simple, whether to believe the people who report it. But there is a smaller claim folded inside the large one, and almost no one pulls it into the light. It has nothing to do with the ships or the beings or the missing hours. It is not that a person was taken, not that they were taken twice. It is that their mother was taken before them, and their daughter, the claim goes, taken after. That idea has been repeated for 30 years. No one has produced the gene. So where did it come from, and why has it outlived the evidence it needs to be true? I want to start with a number, not a dramatic number, a quiet one, 5,947. That is how many adults were surveyed for a report published in 1992, a 64-page document called Unusual Personal Experiences. It was assembled under the names of Bud Hopkins, David Jacobs, and John Mack, and put out by the Bigelow Holding Corporation. For years it was cited as proof of an epidemic. Here is what the survey actually measured: waking up unable to move, missing hours, unexplained lights, scars a person could not account for, a sensation of flight, not abductions, indicators. And here is what it did not measure: no genealogy, no comparison of parents and children, no screening for anything hereditary, nothing about families at all. I am not telling you that number means what it was taken to mean. I am telling you what it counted and what it left out. The report did describe a typical history, one, it said, begins when they are very young, when they were very young. That was a sentence the authors wrote. It was not a finding the survey produced. Before I go further, I owe you an account of where all of this comes from. I have spent the better part of 3 years on the wider subject. About 18 months on this one thread, the family thread, and something like 4 months on a single question inside it that I still cannot answer. I have worked through the case files of the Mutual UFO Network, the organization most people know as MUFON, Bud Hopkins's published casework, the comparative survey the folklorist Thomas Bullard published in 1989, the 1992 report I just described. I have also read the other side, closely. The 2002 study by the psychologist Susan Clancy in the Journal of Abnormal Psychology, the 1993 study by Nicholas Spanos, Raymond Fowler's books on the Andreasen case, Carla Turner's account of her own family, Bill Chalker's forensic work. And I should tell you now, plainly, the thing that shadows all of it. Most of this is testimony, and much of the most vivid testimony was recovered under hypnosis. That is a problem, and I am not going to hide it. I am going to come back to it. The case I want to build this on is not the one you would expect, not Betty and Barney Hill, not Travis Walton, something smaller and stranger, and much closer to a house, something smaller. In 1983, in a wooded subdivision called Copley Woods, near Indianapolis, a woman began describing experiences to the investigator Bud Hopkins. Hopkins gave her a name to protect her, Kathy Davis. Years later, she chose to identify herself publicly as Deborah Jordan Cowbell. What she described was not a single event. It was a series. Medical procedures, reproductive procedures, and, the part that matters here, accounts that did not stay with her. They reached outward, to relatives, to children. Hopkins published the case in 1987 in a book called Intruders, and I want to be precise about what that book did, because it did something specific. It moved the story. It moved it from "this happened to me" toward "this happens to my family." The pattern repeats with unsettling precision, and Intruders is where the repetition first got a shape. Consider what "this happens to my family" actually asks you to accept. Not one anomalous night, but a thread running backward into a person's childhood and forward into the childhoods of their children. Hopkins came to that thread through hypnosis sessions, through drawings, through interviews conducted over months. He was an artist by training, a New York painter who had drifted into this work and never drifted out. He was not a neutral instrument, and he never claimed to be. He thought the pattern was real, and he went looking for it. And here is the difficulty that will follow us the whole way. A man who believes there is a family pattern, asking careful questions of a frightened person over many months, will very often find a family pattern. That is not proof he invented it. It is not proof he found it either. It is the exact place where this subject becomes hard and stays hard. Now, what is the evidence, actually? It is testimony, much of it recovered through hypnosis, some alleged anomalies at the site. It is, in the end, investigator-mediated, assembled between a claimant and a man who already believed there was a pattern to find. I am not telling you a craft landed in Copley Woods. I am telling you this is the case where the family idea was born, and I want you to see the ground it grew from. Why this case, and not the hills? Because the hills were not a generational story. They were two people, one night, one road. Copley Woods is where the generations enter. If Copley Woods were the only one, I would not be making this. It is not the only one. In October of 1974, in Aveley, in Essex, England, a couple named John and Elaine Avis were driving home with their children when, they said, the car passed into a green haze, a green mist. When it cleared, roughly 3 hours were gone. What was recovered later, and I want to flag immediately that most of it was recovered later, under hypnosis, years afterward, had the same shape as Copley Woods. A whole family inside one event. Adults who came to describe an examination. Children who, by most accounts, kept far less of it than their parents. Here is what makes it worth your attention. These two families never met. The New York investigator working the Indiana case and the British investigators working the Essex one had not, at the time, corresponded. Two households, an ocean apart, a decade apart, arriving at the same architecture, the family taken together, the children carried along. And here the skeptic in me raises a hand, because I know what hypnosis does to a memory. I know the elaborate Aveley narrative did not exist in 1974. It was built up in sessions afterward. I know that a husband and wife and their children are not four independent witnesses. They are one household that talks to itself. The resemblance to Copley Woods is real, but resemblance is exactly the thing I am going to have to interrogate, and I will. British investigators of that era stayed, on the whole, more cautious about these cases than their American counterparts, and I hold on to that caution. I think it is earned. A decade and an ocean between two families is a real separation. It is also, I have to admit, not the same as two strangers in the same year, and that difference is where the next part begins. So let me make the strongest case against everything I have just shown you. Not a weak version I can knock down. The strong one. The whole generational pattern could be manufactured. Sleep paralysis, at the edge of sleep, when the body is held still and the mind is not. Cultural scripting, we all know what an abduction is supposed to look like. Families that tell the same story to themselves for decades. Expectation, hypnotic regression, which does not so much recover a memory as build one. This is not a fringe objection. In 2002, the psychologist Susan Clancy and her colleagues ran a laboratory study. People who reported recovered memories of abduction were, in that study, more prone than controls to exhibit false recall and recognition. False recall and recognition, memories never there. Let me sit with that for a moment. Because it is a good objection, it may be the correct one. But narrowing is not refuting. The same body of research notes that people who report these things are not, as a group, more psychopathological or less intelligent than anyone else. Spanos found that in 1993. Not psychotic is not the same as abducted. It is also not nothing. So here is the method for the rest of this. Strip out everything that surfaced only under hypnosis. Keep what people said before they were ever regressed, and what families reported at the time. Then ask one narrow question. Does any of the clustering survive? There are, when you separate the published accounts from the interpretations built on top of them, 5 distinct layers to the generational claim. I want to walk them in order, because the order is the whole argument. And I want to be precise about one thing first. I am not inventing these categories. I am reporting ones that were already sitting in the accounts before I got here. Layer 1. Childhood onset. The claim that it does not begin in adulthood, it begins when a person is very small. Betty Andreasen Luca described her encounter in 1967 from her home in South Ashburnham, Massachusetts, with her family in the house. Raymond Fowler documented it across several books, beginning in 1979, and the account reached backward into her earliest years. The 1992 report proposed the same shape as typical that it starts in childhood. A man I will call T.W., a retired machine shop foreman from Kentucky, put it a different way. He said, "Dad never said alien. He said the bedroom visitors." That was the whole name. The bedroom visitors. A family with a word for it already, worn smooth from use, before anyone ever mentioned spacecraft. Notice what the chronology does. It places the first contact before the reproductive years before, in the logic of the later claim, there could be any reproductive reason for it. Layer 2. Recurrence. Not once again and again, on something that starts to feel like a schedule. In Italy, a security guard named Pier Fortunato Zanfretta reported an encounter in December of 1978, and then further episodes across the next several years, into 1981. One anomalous night can be almost anything. A series, spaced out over years, is a different kind of claim. A woman I will call Maria T., a respiratory therapist from New Mexico, described the feeling of it to me like this. They weren't checking me. It felt more like checking a number against a list. A number against a list, not an event that happened to her, an entry that kept being read. Layer 3. Family clustering. Parents and children, siblings, spouses, reporting the related thing. This is the Aveley shape and the Copley Woods shape both. And it is the layer a woman I will call Ellen, a payroll clerk in western Massachusetts, reached for when she told me, "My mother called them the little doctors." I never told her that was what I called them too. The little doctors. 2 generations, the same private name, and neither one had ever said it to the other. This is the layer where the claim stops being about a person and starts being about a lineage, where selection, if that is what it is, begins to operate above the level of any single life. Layer 4. Reproductive focus. The procedures people describe are not scattered at random over the body. They cluster on its reproductive machinery. Antonio Villas-Boas, the Brazilian farmer, described an encounter in 1957 that he understood in explicitly reproductive terms. Betty Hill, in 1961, described a long needle placed near her navel and being told it was a test for pregnancy. And a woman I will call Patricia, a dental receptionist in Indiana, told me her granddaughter once asked her a question she could not answer. She asked me why Grandma had the same little holes behind her knee. The same little holes. I want to be more careful here than the literature often is. A mark that shows up in 2 generations is not a gene. It is a mark. It is not evidence of anything inherited, except perhaps a family's habit of watching its own skin. But I understand why it feels like more. That is the bridge. The thing that carries a person from this keeps happening to my family. To this is being done to my family for a reason. Layer 5. And here's the strangest part. Layer 5 is the bloodline. This is where researchers and claimants stop describing and start explaining where family recurrence becomes the claim that specific lineages are being selected, tracked, farmed across the generations. Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs, both advanced versions of a program like that. A hybridization reading, built out of years of collected testimony. A woman I will call Denise, a veterinary technician in Colorado, gave it the most disturbing shape I heard anyone give it. What frightened me was that they seemed to know the children first. They knew the children first. Not chosen at random, not chosen for anything you could see chosen, the story says, for something written in the blood. And this is the layer with nothing underneath it. No gene, no allele, no biomarker, no pedigree study, no mechanism that anyone, anywhere, has ever reproduced. I am not telling you the Greys are reading anyone's DNA. I am telling you that this, the loudest layer, the one that the title of nearly every program like this one is quietly selling you, is the single layer that arrived without any of the evidence, a claim that Large would need. Sit with the order of it. The layer with the least behind it is the one everyone remembers. If the bloodline claim were true, there is one place it would have to show up: in a body. So I went looking in bodies. The literature offers a few things: scoop marks, small round scars, and thin straight-line scars, described in that 1992 report as common among people who report these experiences. But the report never establishes where they came from. A scar testifies to an injury. It does not testify to its cause. The strongest physical thing anyone has ever produced is a pair of hairs. In July of 1992, in Sydney, Australia, a man named Peter Curry reported an encounter and later produced 2 pale hairs he said he had recovered afterward. The researcher Bill Chalker built a book published in 2005 around their analysis, 2 pale hairs. And I want to be careful how I put this, because Chalker was careful. The analysis returned something he considered anomalous. But provenance is everything with a physical specimen. Where the hairs came from, who handled them, in what order, none of that can be closed now. And no independent laboratory has ever reproduced the finding into anything you could call evidence. Villas-Boas reported skin symptoms after his encounter, and a physician is said to have examined him, but no specimen ties the symptoms to the event. Fowler, working the Andreasen case, checked the records and found a local power outage on the night in question. That can support a timeline. It cannot carry an abduction. And the thing I kept waiting for never arrived. No reproducible genomic evidence, no pedigree, nothing that links one claimed abductee to another by blood. The silence was deafening. The one place a bloodline would have to leave a trace is the one place there is nothing at all. Not disproven, simply never there. Now to the objection that should trouble me most, because it is the one I find hardest to answer. If everyone has absorbed the same imagery, why wouldn't the accounts converge and start to sound alike? So I went looking for accounts from before the imagery existed. Villas-Boas described a reproductive encounter in 1957, before the modern Grey was fixed in anyone's mind. The Hills, 1961, their account in print by 1966. 2 teenagers at a summer camp on Lake Champlain, at a place called Buff Ledge in 1968, investigated years afterward by Walter Webb. Examination motifs, lost time, the same architecture, surfacing in people who could not have copied a script not yet written. This raises a simple but critical question, and the geography sharpens it. The United States, Brazil, England, Australia, Italy, and, as a comparison only, I want to be strict about this, the Ariel School in Rua, Zimbabwe, in 1994, where dozens of schoolchildren described small figures and where John Mack later interviewed them. I am not offering the children of Ariel as abductees or as anyone's descendants. I am offering them only as evidence of how children describe a thing like this. Nothing more. Not one country, not one decade, not one language. And then the counter-argument, which is strong. Later witnesses do know the imagery. Investigators and therapists do ask leading questions. Hypnosis does build. Relatives do talk. Clancy's laboratory finding sits underneath all of it, and the register is almost always this domestic. A lineman I will call R.M. from Ohio said his young son never described a ship. Only this: he knew which corner of the room not to look at, which corner not to look at. Then a father I will call Robert, a long-haul driver from Arizona, told me why he had come to believe his daughter had not simply copied him. My daughter described the light wrong. She described it wrong. She insisted it was refrigerator blue, not white, and a child copying a parent, he said, gets the color right. I do not know how to fully separate a real echo from a learned one. I have tried for months, and I cannot. So here is my honest verdict. Contamination explains the broad motifs well. It explains the specific bloodline layer badly because that layer arrived late, after the genre had already cross-pollinated nearly everything. You would expect, if any of this were actually being tracked, to find the tracking. So where is it? Start with the careers. When John Mack, a Harvard psychiatrist, a Pulitzer Prize-winning author, with little left to prove, published his book Abduction in 1994, Harvard Medical School convened a formal review of his research practices. It ran for the better part of a year. In 1995 it ended, and it ended without censure. The school reaffirmed his academic freedom and warned him about standards. A tenured man was investigated by his own institution for taking the testimony seriously. That is a real cost. It is not a conspiracy. It is a cost. Then the programs. The Condon Report, 1968, out of the University of Colorado, under Air Force contract, concluded that further extensive study of UFOs probably cannot be justified. The next year, in December of 1969, the Air Force closed Project Blue Book, a program it had run since 1952. But Blue Book counted lights in the sky. It was never a medical study, never a longitudinal one. It could not have found a bloodline if a bloodline existed. The official explanation breaks here, though not in the direction most people want. And what I did not find matters more than what I did. No government bloodline project, no classified genealogy of abductees, no authenticated DNA file on any of these families, no release number I could chase down, not classified, not restricted, not sealed, simply never gathered. I am not telling you a file was buried. I am telling you a file was never opened, and I find that harder to sit with than a cover-up would be, because it is not a story about someone hiding a thing. It is a story about a bureaucracy meeting a category it has no box for and choosing, at every fork, the path that generates the least paperwork. So let me offer a different way of reading everything I have laid out. What if the bloodline is not the thing being followed, but the thing the story requires? What if it is the device, the piece that turns a scattering of frightened, unconnected families into a purpose, and a coincidence into a plan? A recurrence needs a reason. A reason that spans generations needs a mechanism. And blood is the oldest mechanism we have for explaining why a thing follows a family down the years. This is not my invention. The information scientist Jacques Vallée argued, in a book that appeared in 1975, that the phenomenon might be a kind of control system, physical and psychological and cultural all at once, rather than a fleet of ships running a breeding program. He was reaching for a frame that did not require the literal gene. I think he was on to something, and I am not sure it comforts me, because here is what the reframe does and what it does not do. It explains why the idea is so durable without requiring a single strand of evidence, and that's where it becomes impossible to ignore. But it cannot prove the families wrong. 2 readings survive everything I have said. In one, something is following the blood. In the other, the blood is only the shape fear takes when it is forced to explain itself across time. I genuinely do not know which of those is true. I have held both for 18 months, and I cannot put either one down. Mack once asked a question I keep near me. If what these people are describing is not happening to them, then what is? What is? I want to go back to one conversation, because it is the one I have not been able to put down. The woman I called C.L., the school secretary in rural England. I keep returning to something she told me. She and her mother were in the kitchen. Her mother was telling her the family's version of it. And the whole time she talked, she was fighting with the kettle. An old electric kettle whose switch would not stay down. She would push it. It would pop back up. She would push it again. That is the detail that made me lean forward. Not a beam of light, not an operating table. A woman jabbing at a broken kettle switch while she told her daughter the worst thing she believed. Because fabricators smooth things out. They give you the ship. They do not give you the kettle. And then C.L. said it. Mum said it stopped after she had me. Mine started after I had Sophie, stopped after she had me. A handoff, as she understood it from one generation to the next, timed to a birth. I have read that one line back more times than I can count, 40, 50 times. It does not get easier. And the last thing she told me was not about the beings at all. She said she has caught herself, more than once, in a doorway watching Sophie sleep, counting the years until Sophie might have a daughter of her own. Let me try to synthesize this. Not to conclude it, I do not think it can be concluded, but to lay it flat. Layers 1 through 4, childhood onset, recurrence, family clustering, reproductive focus, exist as reports. Real reports made by real people across decades and countries, whatever the cause. Strip away everything that came only from hypnosis. Keep the pre-regression statements and the things families said at the time, and some clustering does remain. Less than the literature claims, more than 0. Layer 5 is different in kind. The bloodline is not a report. It is an inference laid over the other 4, and it is the one carrying no verified evidence at all. So what am I left holding? A pattern in the telling, not proven, not disproven, not even really tested. It does not on its own demand a biological explanation. It also does not forbid one. And beside it, the family's own reading a mother in a doorway, certain she already knows what is coming, which survives everything I can throw at it, because it was never a scientific claim to begin with. It was a fear. Mack said these people reported being taken against their wills. Against their wills. That much the being taken. In the telling is the one thing everyone actually agrees on. I am not making a claim. I am laying the pieces where you can see them, and telling you which ones I could not make fit, which leaves me with the questions I cannot put down. Why does the same-shaped child, then adult, then child, again keep surfacing in people who never met? Why does it appear before the template existed, and after it saturated, and in a handful of languages in between? If it is only cultural scripting, why does the clustering still sit there in the fragments people gave before anyone had ever hypnotized them? And if it is not only scripting, why has no mark, no hair, no sample ever survived a second look? Why is the loudest layer, the bloodline, the one with nothing at all underneath it? Who benefits from turning a coincidence of frightened families into a plan? Is the pattern in the abductions or in the way we tell them? Why did no institution ever gather the one data set that could settle it? What would it take to build that data set now, and why does no one seem to want to? What is a mother counting when she stands in a doorway and watches her daughter sleep and thinks about the years ahead? And what, exactly, does she believe is waiting at the end of the counting? The marker has never been found. The counting has never stopped. 3 years I have spent near this, and I can tell you what is documented and what is missing, which cases came before the template and which came after, where every trail goes cold and why. I can tell you that no gene has ever been produced, and that families go on believing in one anyway, and that both of those things are true at the same time. What I cannot tell you is the thing you came here for. So I will leave it where the evidence leaves it. What, exactly, is being passed down, and why has no one, in 30 years, ever managed to hold it in their hand?